Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you to the second part of a two-part presentation that I started in the previous show, and I'm just continuing on with this one. And first of all, for those of you who are new to the show, this is an African-centered talk show. And the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce fact where you find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to people of African descent. And what I started off in the first show say, talking about that when it comes to the discussion of people of African descent in this country, in America, there's a whole lot of other people telling us who we are, and many try to go with the old mythology that all we were was, when it comes to people in America, we first came here in 1619 in Virginia, and our history in America is from 1619 to this very moment of 2019. In fact, this is the 400th anniversary of that Dutch man of war coming into Virginia, to the settlement in Virginia, and depositing a number of African enslaved people that they took off another slaver that they ripped off from that ship, and for food they exchanged for these enslaved people. And it's kind of ironic that it was a Dutch ship, because I introduced a black scholar. His name is Dr. Ivan van Sertimer. In the previous show, I introduced him. And this great scholar, this great man, many of you do not even know, I'm sure, never heard of him. In fact, his name, Ivan van Sertimer, is Dutch. And the reason it's Dutch is because this black man was born in the Americas, in South America, in Dutch Guiana, okay? In fact, he didn't go to college. He was the first one. You had to compete. He was born in 1936. He went almost by the time he got to college, he was nearly 30 years old, all right? But when he got to London, where he was educated in London College, and he was a linguist, he is an anthropologist. He is a literary critique. So he's a literary critic. I mean, and like I said, also that he was so brilliant that the Swedish government honored him by making him the person that went around looking for writers in literature to pick and nominate for the Nobel Prize in Literature every day. It was up to him to choose who was eligible, whose body of work was good enough to be nominated for the Nobel Prize. So this is the kind of scholar that I'm talking about. And he wrote this seminal work in 1976. It came out in 1976. That's what I'm continuing this discussion on. I introduced this book in the first show. One of my favorite books, and one of the books that blew my mind, and meticulously researched by this great man. The African presence in ancient America. They came before Columbus. Again, it was published in 1976 and immediately attacked by the established order of archaeologists and other and anthropologists of the time. But it stood their complaints. It stood their critiques, and his thesis is highly documented. And he also points out again that he was not the first person that said this, that there were black from Africa here in the ancient world, especially in the Olmec period of time. It was another book that he mentioned, and everything's in this book that I'm going to mention to you today. So don't have to listen to me. You go do your own research. You know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We got men like Dr. Van Sertima who's there. This next image that I want to show you from the last one, it talks about the Olmec civilization, which he talks about in his books. And you notice there's a head there. They're called Olmec's heads, and there were many of them found. But I'll talk about that later on in this show. But this Olmec civilization that, like I said, centered around the Gulf of coast of Mexico area in the Americas, right next to this place called Texas, around Veracruz, Tabasco today. You know, and it was a great civilization, a mysterious civilization. In fact, a lot of the structures that are associated with the Aztecs and the pyramids and all those things, they were not Mayans. No, they occupied Olmec structures. Okay, they were the recipients of called the Olmec civilization. Pretty much disappeared maybe 800 years ago or so, in the ADs. They don't know much about it. Only know what was left behind. And just like the pyramids in Egypt and other ancient African sites, a lot of the things are baffling to scholars to this very day of what they did. But what they do know, especially in the last 100 years of research, you know, archaeologically, anthropologically, botanical type research, and all these other things that, you know, is in the book that shows that there is some kind of there was some kind of connection between the Africans of that time. When you talk about 1200 even to 400 BC, there are evidence that there were Africans who came across the Atlantic, and not only did business with this culture because of the exchange. Just like today, you can see certain things that were, say, invented here in America, but now you see in Europe, whether it's in science, whether it's in certain commercial things, certain trade items that are going back and forth. We like to believe that this modern era, the first time the world was connected, but more and more evidence shows that, you know, there was some connection, you know, with other people that came across the islands. And I'll show you somehow how they did it. Again, the evidence is there. My complaint earlier, and still is today, is like, there are people, especially people that look like me, who put information on the internet, but they don't back it up with any documentation. They just make a statement. And then of course, it makes it look like they're just making things up. And that's the thing for those who want to maintain the image that black people didn't give anything to this world. We're the oldest representation of humankind, according to the science of mitochondrial DNA, that traces human beings back and back and back through the mitochondria, which is only found in females, and it goes back to Africa, a black woman, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago. So, but in this modern, especially the last 400 or 500 years, people that look like me, that come from the continent of Africa, to validate the slave trade that is a stain on Europe and America, modern America today, for what they did to millions and millions of people, they have to make them look like they were just above animals, okay? That their mental capacity, you know, was not good enough. That it wasn't until the dawning of the age of reason in Europe, and, you know, the Romans and the Greeks and those that they associate, even though those are Mediterranean cultures. But if you dominate the system, you can write the books the way you did, way you want. You know, that's, you know, he who wins the war, you know, writes the book. There's an old African saying, if the lions won, they would have a different story than the hunter, okay? And African people, after the breakup of some great empires around the time of the ascendancy of Europe with gunpowder and their exploration in the 14 and 15 and 1600, 17, and so on, all those 500 years, 600 years of that history, there was a narrative that it still exists today, that until Europe came, everybody else were less than, especially people of African descent. Because why else would you have them as enslaved? Why would you have, as Malcolm said, the established order of logic? That's the logic of the dominant group that is put into the books, that's put into the communication system, that's put into the movies. You always see a white face always in the dominant position. Even in academia, the same thing has happened. And Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, with his book, put that, had to fight that type of institutionalized scientific mythology that we call the educational system, or the miseducation, as Carter G. Woodson put in. But where I was I think I ended at this particular map at the last show, and I wanted to go on from there and talking about the Olmec. You see right there in the middle, you see Tres Zapatas, La Venta, San Lorenzo. What's significant about those three areas? In fact, if you go on a cruise ship down, to Mexico today and you visit some of these places, you'll find these great pyramids. But you also, many people might not know about, find these great Olmec heads. But before I get to the Olmec heads, I want to go to the next slide. I want to bring some clarity to something that I said earlier. Now, if you see this map here, it is a map of the ocean currents, okay? As you can see, to your right on the screen is Africa, and then to your left, you'll see South America and the Caribbean, up above South America, and then United States. If you look, I want to stay on this map for a little while. If you look at the circular motion, those wiggly lines, that's the ocean currents. They're like conveyor belts. They go around and around the Atlantic, the Great Atlantic coast. Now, on the right there, you'll see the Cape Verde Islands, it's called. They're right off the coast of Guinea, I think. They're a chain of islands. And Columbus, people don't realize, if you look up on the right, you see Europe and you see Spain. Columbus didn't leave for Spain to the Americas. What he did was went down the coast of Africa, okay, you see your right, and you see the Cape Verde Islands. In fact, that was controlled by the Portuguese. Again, like I said in the last show, Columbus was married to a Portuguese woman. In fact, his brother was also married to a Portuguese woman, and they were of noble birth or had high ranking in the Portuguese court. That's why he could get an audience with King John I think John II of Portugal, because he had influence and access to the court. He went to the Portuguese first for funding. The Portuguese were there in Guinea from around 1450, 30 or 40 years before Columbus went there in Guinea and Gambia and the Cape Verde Islands, before Columbus went there in 1488. And now, when he was there, the Portuguese documented that the native people, the ethnic groups along that west coast of Africa, all talked about Africans coming down and to the Cape Verde area and going just a little bit south. There's one of those currents that you see just below Cape Verde, that if you get into that current, it was like 100 miles off the coast, you would see and get caught in that current. It'll take you directly across the Atlantic. These are strong currents, boats that can take you, that these Africans, the story is that they did trade across that current. So it was very easy for the Africans of the time, even at the time of 400 BC and during the time of the Olmecs, to go across. There were actually three currents. You got the current just below the Cape Verde Islands. You go a little south, you'll find where Senegal is, just around that, where it curves into under the A. You'll see a little curvature into and going down the western coast to the South Africa. Well, where that current is there, that's where they call it the Gambia, the Senegambia current. Okay, and that's another current that goes across. So there were three currents, and you had the currents that down at the bottom of South Africa, and that will take you to the end tip of South America. You get one of the other currents, and you go up to South America. The first two would take you to the northern part of South America, and into the Bahamas and the Caribbean. The Bahamas is where Columbus first landed, okay, on his first voyage. Never touched the America. He never set foot in the Americas. Or second voyage, or he was in the islands and those Caribbeans. Okay, this was known. Again, like I said in the first, you got the Portuguese documentation of this. You also have the Africans who said that there were many black people or Africans who would take those currents and they would have big ships with products. Okay, and this is the and this is a copy of this is called the Ra 1, and in 1969, a Norwegian scientist called Thor Heyerdahl. This ship was built by fishermen on the Chad Lake Chad in Gambia. Lake Chad is a huge lake that covers Chad, Nigeria, Kenya, and African Guinea. But this was built by these Chad fishermen, according to the blueprint of ancient Egyptian ships. Similar. This is a copy of an ancient Egyptian ship that was built in 1960s to do the experiment of whether one of these ships could make it across on one of those currents. And it did. It made it all the way to Barbados. The only thing that went wrong with this 1960, the only reason they stopped in Barbados is because the rudder broke, and it what steered them. But they had no problem making it across the Atlantic Ocean. Again, you got oceanographical evidence. Another thing that was documented by again, this picture here is 1969. This was when this ship made that crossing on a Egyptian-style ship. Okay, they found these blueprints in temples documented in Egyptian temples, and they copied the same schematics, and Africans who had navigational skills. The Portuguese even wrote in their documentation of coming across Africans when they were going to occupy Gambia. There was a Gambian navy that they had to come across, documented by the Portuguese. Again, they came to Africa in 1450, long before Columbus even got there first got there in 1488. Another thing that the Portuguese wrote about, when they first came to places like African Guinea and Gambia and Chad, they saw cotton being grown. Now, there's nothing wrong with cotton. You know, you got Egyptian cotton. Cotton was on the African continent for centuries, and they document this thing. But it was later found when they did an assay of this cotton, that this cotton, the one the Portuguese got there, they went and planted this cotton in Cape Verde. Okay, the same islands that I said that Christopher Columbus and others had left south and got onto the current that took them across to the Americas. They found that this cotton is only, this species of cotton is only found in the Americas, in South America and islands in the Caribbean. How did it get to the west coast of Africa? And this is way before Columbus even made his 1492, okay? Because the Portuguese found this cotton grown in Africa when they got there in 1450. How did it get there? And this is scientifically proven unique to the Americas. So it validates, and for me, it validates what the Africans were saying about big ships and Africans going south of the Cape Verde Islands, just like that map of the currents show you, and taking these things across. They found corn, maize in Gambia. You know, at the level, they have different stratas where they could find, plants, and they could carbon date the plants at that era of strata. You know, they found corn at the level of the Olmec, at the time of the Olmec Empire. They found corn in Africa. Corn comes from the South America, Mexico, you know, all the native people. So there was some kind of commercial exchange. You have cotton from South America found in Africa. This is all documented by the Portuguese. You got Columbus' journey, and then the amazing thing that you have is this head that I want to show you. You know, they found this at those 3 sites. You said La Portes, La Venta, you know, those cities I showed you on that map. Look at that face. Look at my face. If you could put my image up on this, all right? These were called the Olmec head because they were found, first they were found in La Portes, close to the Gulf of Mexico, which happened to be close to those currents, where that current will take you up along the coast of America into the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, La Portes. The first one was found in 1858. Okay, but archaeology, anthropology, those disciplines were not, you know, top of the line at that time. It took another 100 years. And there was an expedition that was done by the National Geographic. This was in 1938, when they went to try to discover the head again, that was found in 1858 by peasants in La Portes. Look at this. Look at the helmet. Look at the face. Look at this. There was a stele. A stele is like a marker. It's tall and it's a narrow marker. You find stele in all kinds of ancient sites, monuments. They just dictate what was done at a particular time and, you know, events. You got Egyptian stele near their monuments. You have the stele that was found in the Americas, where the people would just, hey, you know, a marker, a monument that says on this day or this happened. They found a stele that put the first Olmec head in 1858, something like 291 BCE. Okay, that was written. It was written November. I forgot what was the actual day, but November 2091 BCE. BC. That was next to the head that they found. And then the next picture I want to show. Another example. This picture here. This was the expedition I was talking about that came in 1948. At first, they went and found the head, the first head that they found in 1858, 1938. They went back to La Portes. Okay, not only they found La Portes, the head again, they rediscovered the head, but they found 7 more in La Venta. Okay, 7 more heads. And these monumental heads, they were something like anywhere from 10 tons to 40 tons, anywhere from 10 feet to 20 feet high. Large heads, these African heads. Now, it has been proven that they were African heads. It has been proven that they were go back to the time of the Olmecs. Because if you look at that head, I just put that picture. This is a famous picture of a Manda man next to one of the heads to see the similarity. Ancient. There's another picture I wanted to show that's even more powerful. As you can see, there's a helmet that shows the military helmet. They found in Egypt, Tennis, a city of Tennis, helmets like that. They found skeletal remains that were definitely Africoid, as they put it, around La Venta. In fact, they found so many skeletal remains that they say they estimated of these Africans to be 13% of the population. America today, we are 13% of this population here. And this one, which is the most mind-blowing, one of those heads had actual African braids. Why don't you know this? Why don't you get this information in school? Dr. Ivan Van Sertima did. His book came out with these images in 1976. Leo Wiener's book came out in 1926. John Boyd Thatcher's book came out in 1904, talking about the African presence in the real world. But you think that we only came here as enslaved people in 1619. Now, if I just said this without any of those documents, we would have the same problem that many of you are doing today, without understanding and honoring this great man, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Peace, Hotep, bye-bye.